Hi, I'm Matt Cooksey. I'm going to show you how to install the Quatreau TouchTap. These systems fit inside a standard cabinet. Please make sure you've read and understood the pre-installation checklist and have brought with you the correct tools to carry out the installation. Let's get this system installed. So before we start, let's just make sure that we're going to put the hole for the Quatreau TouchTap in the kitchen counter in the correct place. Make sure there's clear space underneath the kitchen counter. And then if we just mark the center of the sink, so if we get a mark on one side, and if we mark the other side, and if we measure between those two, and get a mark for the center, and then just make sure that we get the center of the gap between the splashback and the edge of the sink, and then mark the center of that. So we know we've got the start point for the center of the Quatreau TouchTap hole. So we're going to drill the hole with a 38mm hole saw. Just before you install the Quatreau TouchTap, put a small bead of clear silicone around the underside of the base of the tap. So we're now going to install the Quatreau TouchTap, just making sure that when you feed the wire through the hole, just make sure it doesn't get trapped behind any pipework that's underneath the sink. If you just guide that in there nice and gently, and if you turn the tap around, and if you slide it into the hole, just making sure you don't trap any of the wires. So once the Quatreau TouchTap is in place, you need to make sure it's secure, and you need to do this with the securing washer and nut that are in the kit. First of all, you need to slide the washer up the cable and then slide it onto the TouchTap base. Slide that all the way up as far as you can go. And then you need to slide the locking nut up the cable next and then onto the base of the tap. Just be careful because this is quite tight because it has to go onto the thread. Just give it a wiggle. Once you've started the nut on the thread, just spin that up just until you feel the two locking screws bite onto the washer at the top. Once they've bitten, just give it a nip. And if you take a flat screwdriver and just take the last little bit of play up with those screws. The reasoning behind this is just in case you're behind a sink that you can't really get to easily, you can just nip it up with those screws and then you know that your tap is nice and secure. So now we have to connect the silicone water pipe to the base of the TouchTap. Always make sure that the pipe with the T goes to the right-hand barb on the bottom of the TouchTap. This makes sure that the boiling water goes up the center of the tap, not on the outside of the tap. So just make sure that's pushed up as far as it goes, and then close the spring clip up and slide that up over the barb until it's about halfway up. So you know that that's nice and secure. Then make sure that this T is pointing roughly in the direction of where we're going to set the drain. This is your hand hot and cold water that goes always on the barb on the left hand of the base of the TouchTap. Make sure you slide the silicone pipe all the way up and then make sure that you slide the spring clip up the pipe and try and go about halfway up the barb just to make sure it's nice and secure. At this point, we need to cut out the essential ventilation for the chiller. These are marked out 35mm in from the front of the cabinet, 235mm wide, and 32mm in from the left-hand side of the cabinet. So option one of the chiller vent kit, you need the skirt that sits underneath the chiller. and you need the extension for the vent on the front. It simply connects together, and you can see there's screw holes there that line up with screw holes in the skirt, and you get the screws provided. So that's your extended vent kit, and as you can see, there's a lip on the front that would sit on the base of your cupboard at the very front, covering the slot that we cut out earlier on. The next stage of the ventilation skirt, you have to unscrew the 2 screws from the chiller chassis. The back plate then locates using the existing screw holes in the chiller chassis. The chiller then sits on top of the skirt, and the plate you've just installed covers the vent at the back, so the chiller will now vent correctly. If it's not fitted correctly, you may have issues with the chiller venting and working properly. This is option 1 of the chiller vent kit. As you can see, the extended vent covers the hole you cut in the bottom of the cupboard earlier. That fits over there with a lip on the front that stops it moving back. Air can then get drawn in from underneath the vent into the chiller and exhaust out the back. The only time you can't use this kit is if you have a kick panel that is actually flush with the base of the cupboard, or if you have a cupboard door that goes all the way to the floor, then you need to use option 2 of your chiller vent kit. This is option 2 for the essential ventilation for the chillers. It needs to be 232 millimeters from the front of the cupboard, and it's 210 mil wide. It's the section that is shadowed out in this picture now, and it has to be 50 mil in from the left-hand side of the cupboard. This is the first part of your trunking for the ventilation for your chiller. This trunking then slots inside the hole in the kitchen cupboard. And if you see, there's 2 locating pins there and there. Your second bit of trunking then connects to the front of that, locking into those locating pins. The front of this trunking will then match up to the hole you've cut in the kick panel. Now that the hole has been cut, we can install the first part of the trunking for the ventilation for your chiller, making sure that the hole in the trunking points towards the front of the cabinet. That slots in. Should be nice and tight. And then the second part of the trunking clips into the front. The Quatreau chiller ventilation skirt comes in kit form in the box. It just needs to be clipped together so the end cap goes over the skirt. You've then got 4 screws to put in, 2 on either side, that'll make the skirt. The next stage of the ventilation skirt, you have to unscrew the 2 screws from the chiller chassis. The back plate then locates using the existing screw holes in the chiller chassis. The chiller then sits on top of the skirt, and the plate you've just installed covers the vent at the back, so the chiller will now vent correctly. If it's not fitted correctly, you may have issues with the chiller venting and working properly. I'm now going to show you how to install the drain-off kit so we can connect the AA air gap for the Venturi T. When you open the bag for the kit, you'll find these 2 parts here. They're a saddle clamp that fit over the 40mm waste pipe. Make sure in this side of the saddle clamp, you put the O-ring. Just sits inside that recess there. And then if you put that over the top of your waste pipe and then the other part of the saddle clamp underneath. You then have 4 retaining bolts that just screw into the captive nuts. If you just start those all finger tight, and then using flat blade screwdriver, just go around. If you do them nice and evenly as you go, and make sure that the saddle clamp is pulled down evenly, try not to screw one down all the way tight until everything has started. So once you've got it going, so if you just work around them evenly, just to make sure they're all pulling down nice and evenly, just to make sure that seal is making a really nice tight fit onto the plastic pipe. So make sure they're all nice and tight. And then in the kit, you'll see this little device. Just be careful when you take the cap off, because there's a sharp blade inside there. This has got a screw thread on this part. This fits inside the saddle clamp that's got a screw thread that matches the cutting device. If you just start that with your fingers, you then get a little bar that slides through. And then the blade will be cutting through your white drain pipe. It can be quite tight, but it's not too bad. So just keep going. And then once it cuts through, you'll hear a little pop, and it'll be a lot easier to turn on the thread. Keep screwing a little bit longer just to make sure that the little hole is cut through, and then back that off. Make sure you replace the cap on that little blade, just for a bit of safety. You'll then have your little one-way valve. This is obviously to stop any water, if your drain ever gets blocked, coming back up the pipe. Also helps with odours. Screw that on, just nip that on hand tight. And then if you bring your AA air gap on, that then screws into that as well. And then tighten it down. That's nice and tight. If you do need to fit the air gap and the drain off to a vertical pipe, all you need to do in the kit is this little elbow, and that just screws on there, and then the one-way valve and the air gap screws in on the top. The Venturi T will connect to the top of the air gap, making sure that this T is actually going down to the air gap. When connecting your silicone pipework from your water heater control unit up to your Quatreau TouchTap, make sure that your silicone pipework with the Venturi T goes into the port with the red colour code on, up to the bar with the red colour code on the TouchTap, and your blue up to your blue. Within your supplied install kit, you'll have a 3/4 to 3/8 fitting, speed fitting. You need to screw that onto your mains cold water inlet. You need to screw it down and do it hand tight. You don't need to get pliers or anything on this, just nice and tight with your hand. And there's a rubber seal in there that makes sure it's watertight. We're going to be connecting blue pipe to that now, which you'll get a roll of in the install kit as well. Just pull off a small amount of the pipe because you're not sure of the whereabouts you're going to need to exactly go. So if you just put maybe a metre of blue pipe, try and keep it out the way, so possibly tuck it behind any pipe. Just needs to go in, and if you can see, there's a little collar on the top of that speed fitting. Just needs to be, pipe needs to be pushed in nice and tight. And the way to check that it's sealed nicely is if you pull the pipe against it, back against it, you'll see that the collar lifts up. That collar lifts up means that it's gripping the pipe, so that'll be nice and watertight. We now connect the next part. So the next stage is, as part of the supplied install kit, you'll have a 1/2 inch to 3/8 speed fit that goes on the bottom of the thermomixing valve. You do have to tighten this one up with a spanner. Just need to nip it up with your fingers. Just get your spanner and just give it a couple of turns. Make sure you don't over tighten it. You'll feel if you over tighten it, because it just it'll stop being easy to turn. just need to tighten it there and then just give it a little bit extra just to make sure it's nice and tight. There is a rubber seal in there again to make sure you don't have any water leaks. So just make sure you don't over tighten it, that's really important. And then we connect the blue pipe in there once again. You push the blue pipe into the speed fitting, you'll feel it go in, and then you just need to give it another push and you'll see that it's locked because you pull it out and you can see the collar of the speed fitting just coming down. Once you've done that, you're okay then to fit the locking clips on the speed fittings. So just make sure you pull the blue pipe away from the fitting. This then clips in and this locks in place. And if anything is knocked underneath there, it'll stop this from getting bent or moved and causing the leak. And at the same time, we do the other fitting that we done earlier on. And as you can see, that just sits nicely in that collar. And you know that that's nice and watertight, won't have any water leaks. We're now going to install the water heater control unit. Just be careful to make sure you don't damage the cupboard as you slide the unit in. Just take it nice and steady. Just make sure it doesn't foul on anything. Make sure you've got enough room to work around. And we can now start connecting the water pipes to the machine. We're now going to cut into the 3/8 blue pipe, which is your mains cold water feed. This has to be cut into so we can supply your hand cold water on this side of the machine and your cold water in on this side of the machine. I'm just going to cut it with a pair of pipe cutters. We're now going to install a 3/8 to 3/8 to 1/4 T. This once again clips onto the pipe, just making sure that that collar moves in and out once you've connected the pipe on. As you can see, that collar now comes in and out. We can now connect to the mains cold water for the TouchTap on the left-hand side of the system and your mains cold water feed in on the right-hand side of the system. I'm now going to put in the 1/4 blue pipe. This is for your mains feed-in for your chilled and sparkling and boiling water. I'll now connect it to the 1/4 side of the T, making sure the pipe is pushed in, pull out so that the collar comes out, and then I'm going to need to cut into this pipe twice. Once, just so I can fit an isolation valve. Whenever you fit an isolation valve, always turn it off. That is off now. That is on when it's horizontal with the white part of the valve. That is now off. So always install them with them switched off. Connect that, once again making sure that they're pushed in properly. Pull them out so that the collar comes out. Connect that side. And again, making sure that the collar comes out. I'm now going to cut into the pipe for a second time, just so I can install the 1/4 inch filter. There is an arrow on the filter which shows the direction of flow that we need to follow. We now connect that into the pipework, just making sure once again that we connect the blue pipes properly and make sure that that collar actually comes out. It's a good time now to just install the red clips. So on both sides of the 3/8 fitting and on all the 1/4 fittings you just installed. We're now going to chop into the pipework for the mains hand cold water. We just need to chop into the 3/8 blue pipe twice just to install the isolator, which we should always turn off. We're now going to install the isolator onto the 3/8 blue pipe, making sure that the isolator is switched off. Connect up to the blue pipe, making sure that that collar once again pulls out. Connect the rest of the 3/8 blue pipe. We now need to cut into this 3/8 blue pipe just to install the filter, where we're going to install the 3/8 filter, making sure that we follow the direction of flow into the system. Once again, making sure that those blue pipes are pushed in properly and that the collar comes out. And now we connect the 3/8 blue pipe into the mains hand cold feed, just making sure that is pushed in and that the collar lifts up. This is a good time now. We connect all the red locking clips. We're now going to connect the 3/8 pipe from the thermomixing valve to the hand hot side of your system. We just need to connect onto the speed fitting, just making sure that's pushed in and the collar comes down. We then need to cut into this twice like we did previously. The first time for the isolator, which we should always have turned off. And then again for the 3/8 filter. Once again, making sure we follow the arrow for the direction of flow. And then try and neaten up the blue pipes. And this is a good time to install the red locking clips. That's the system connected to the water. We're now going to install the comms cable from the touch panel on the tap to your water heater control system. Just snaps in there. Did you hear the click? Just make sure it's clicked in, give it a little tug to make sure it's in there nice and tight. We're now going to connect the power cable. Please ensure that the power is switched off before you connect the lead. It's a C19 power lead. You just connect it and then push it home. We're now going to connect the silicone hose from the TouchTap down to the water heater control unit. On the right-hand side of the TouchTap barb at the bottom, it was the one with the Venturi T. That pipe always gets connected to the front of the system on a TouchTap, and that'll be the one with the 3/8 isolator cap on there. This will be for your boiling water. So if you just remove the isolator cap, there may well be a tiny little bit of water expansion, so don't panic if just a little bubble of water comes out. Just catch it with a cloth, just give it a dab. Your silicone pipe then connects onto there. You may need to cut these to length because there is quite a long pipe when they come out of the packet, just because you might have the machine in a different place. Just cut it to length and then connect the spring clip just to hold it all in place. Just so you know that's nice and secure. And at the base of the TouchTap on the left-hand side, the tube coming out, silicone tube coming out, that needs to go on the back pipe that's coming out. Just need to slide that over, making sure it's all the way on. And if we just connect up the spring clip as before. If we just give it a tug, just to make sure they're nice and secure. So now we're going to connect the chiller to the water heater control unit. There's labels on top of the chiller. These correspond with the screen printing on the side of the system. So on the top of the chiller here, we've got chilled out, quarter blue pipe, into your chilled out, making sure that that collar is locked in, and that will correspond to chilled in on the side of the water heater control unit. Pushing that in, make sure it's tucked out of the way so you're not going to bash it. Then you've got soda out, remove the blanking cap, quarter blue pipe to soda out, making sure that collar's locked in. That corresponds to carb in. just links into the same one. You've then got CO2 in, quarter blue pipe again, into the fitting, goes into CO2 out on the machine, making sure it's locked in place. Last one is water in, connects into H2O out on the side of the water heater control unit, making sure that pipe's in and the collar is locked. So once we've connected the pipes, we make sure we put the safety clips in once again and make sure the collar's lifted up. We're now going to commission the water heater control unit and the chiller. It's a very important process. Please make sure before you start that the power is off for both units and the water is isolated to both units. When we start the commissioning process, what we need to do first is just take off the stainless steel filter housing from the front. And then if we put the carbon filter, if you remove it from the box and take off all the packaging, and then if we slide the carbon filter into the stainless steel filter housing, if we then offer the filter housing up to the edge of the system, and then if you use the collar, let me show you the collar. Use the collar of the carbon filter just to tighten it up. And you only need to do this hand tight as well. Just nip it up. You don't need to go and get any pliers or anything like that on there. Just use your fingertips just to spin that around. And then screw the stainless steel filter housing back on. Once again, you don't need to over tighten this at all. You can just do that up by hand. That's your carbon filter installed. So the next stage is making sure that we commission the chiller properly. So it's very important that we make sure that there's water inside the chiller before we get the pump in the chiller to work, so it doesn't get damaged. So what we need to do is, at this point, just turn the water heater control unit on. You'll see a red light come up on the front, which means the system is on and it's actually heating the water that's in the tank. All the tanks are delivered with water in them. So a brand new water heater control unit will always have water in the heater tank. So when you've got a red light on there, you know that the system is working. Your buttons on your touch screen should light up. What we need to do now, we just need to connect the gas to the machine, because we need to pour gas through the chiller to make sure everything's working correctly. Get your gas bottle. This all comes with the kit as well. Screw the bottle on, keep screwing it up, and it will make a hiss. That's just it connecting to the gas bottle. Keep screwing after the hiss and it'll stop. Screw it on hand tight again. The gas regulators on these are set at factory, so you know that the gas mix for the chiller should be correct. What we need to do now is call for sparkling on the touch tap, which is the bottom right icon, and gas should burst out from the spout. So we know now that there's gas in the chiller. What we need to do now is just turn the water on into the heater control unit. And we just need to go up to the Quatreau TouchTap screen and press the chilled function icon. So we now know that we've got water running through the chiller. So So we know we're not going to damage anything internally in the chiller. At this point, we can turn the chiller on. You'll hear the fan and the compressor kick in for the chiller. And you'll also hear for a short period of time, maybe 20, 30 seconds, the pump cut in for the gas. That's pumping water into the gas canister inside the chiller. Once this cuts off, we should be able to call for sparkling. And it may take about 3 or 4 glasses of sparkling water just to make sure there's a really nice mix. Once it looks like you've got quite a nice flow, if you turn it off and then just turn it on again, just make sure that flow of sparkling water is nice. That's perfect. That's the chiller commissioned. All we have to do now is on the front of the system, the red light means that the element inside the water heater control unit is heating the water. Once this light goes amber and red and then green, as soon as it goes green and stays green, you know that the water's hot enough to be able to test it. Just takes a few minutes. But what we can do while that's heating up now, we can actually get some sterilisation into the chiller, just to make sure that obviously when we're drinking the water, it's nice and clean. Now we have to sterilise the internal parts of the water heater control unit, the chiller, and the Quatreau TouchTap. We need to start off doing this by isolating the water to your mains feed in. We keep everything switched on. If we just call for sparkling water or chilled water, just to make sure that we haven't got any pressure behind the water system. So making sure, as I say, that the mains water is isolated. What we can do now, we can just remove the stainless steel filter housing. You might find that a bit of water just drips out, so as I say, put a cloth underneath. If we just let that drop down, do it nice and slowly, and then if we unscrew the carbon filter, just take it nice and steady, just so that it doesn't drop down inside the canister, the stainless steel filter housing, and splash water everywhere. And if we just lift that out, bring the stainless steel filter housing down, there's still some water in there. And if we just put the recommended measured amount with the product that I use, we just use a cap full. Just making sure that doesn't go on your clothes or anything, because it is a very mild bleaching agent, so it will mark your clothes if you're not careful. And then if we screw the stainless steel filter housing back in place, once again, you don't need to go mad doing this up. Just tighten it up just until if we then get a jug or a cup and go up to the Quatreau TouchTap screen and press the chilled function icon, draw some water through, just making sure there's no air. Run it for a few seconds to make sure there's no air left in that system. As soon as you're happy there's no air, if you just stop the water flow, and you can clearly smell there's sanitisation fluid in that water. We need to leave that for a minimum of 10-15 minutes to allow the sanitisation to do its thing. Once we've left that, if we just run off at least a litre of water just until you can't smell the sanitisation fluid anymore. At that point, we can then replace the carbon filter that we removed. Once you've replaced the carbon filter, just run some chilled water off, just to make sure the water's completely clear. Once you're happy that the water's running completely clear, that's your system installed. Thank you very much.